Welcome to the Sunday afternoon show with me, Lucy Marskell. It's so great to have you here on this sunny day. I hope you're having a really good one this weekend. I've got my special guest, Sarah Holloway, for my Life and Lyrics segment. I'm going to be talking to her about her awesome story and also the four songs that have really reflected what God's done in her life. So welcome, Sarah. How are you doing?
Hey, lovely to see you, Lucy.
Awesome. It's lovely to meet you, Sarah. Where are we talking to you from? Where are you based in the UK?
I'm down in sunny Sussex, yes, in the UK.
Fantastic. Love that there. So nice. So glad to hear you've got the good weather in Sussex. Well, it's so good to talk about your story because I know it's a very interesting one. You've had so many things happen in your life that have led you to where you are. So could you tell us a little bit more, firstly, actually, about your Tuesday show? Because your Tuesday show is about entertainment and everything great before we go into it.
Well, I think my show can be a bit varied. I try to take people behind the scenes because I think, when I was growing up, you see people in all kinds of spaces, but you don't really know about their lives or what really goes
Mm.
on. And we see even Christians in those celebrity spaces that have kind of on platforms, in other words. But we don't really know their story. We hear some amazing songs and films that we see. So I like to interview people, particularly artists, music, film, those kind of things, actors, directors. I can't do that every week. So, we have a lot of faith along the way, a lot of sometimes a bit of fun, sometimes a bit more serious deep dive into biblical truths, really exploring faith and yeah, and lots of great current and particularly a lot of UK British Christian artists as well. Great music. My
Fantastic. Yeah, it's something varied, isn't it, every week, which I love about it because I love music and film as well. And, I know that's your background. So tell us a bit more because I know growing up, you had the passion for the arts, I think, from the very early in the beginning. Could you tell us where that passion for the arts comes from and maybe walk us through some memories that have led you to what you do today?
Yes, well, I was talking to my mum about this the other day, and then I looked up, and there's a really funny clip because, I remember her telling me, and I was very young, only a few years old, and I would dance to a group that you've probably never heard of called Pan's People, and they were on Top of the Pops. And so I looked it up, and there was this woman called Leslie Judd, and there's a little TikTok clip about her talking about when she's from Blue Peter, if anybody remembers the show Blue Peter, going back a long time, showing my age. But yeah, she was doing this dance, and Top of the Pops was like the in trendy, cutting edge music, who's in the charts. But Pan's People, they had like this almost flamenco style dance that was on this kind of TikTok clip, and she's talking through it. But yeah, from a very young age, I would stand in front of the television and try and imitate. And so my mum said that about the age of 7, she said, I'm going to have to find some dance around here. So she sent me off to tap dance class. And I really used to love all the old films with people like Gene Kelly, Fred Astaire, and even like there's a film called White Nights with a ballet dancer, Mikhail Baryshnikov, and tap dancer Gregory Hines. If you watch it, it just was like I was in my element when I was on stage and growing up, and particularly through my teen years. If you've heard of the film Fame, and there was a TV series called The Kids from Fame, and yes, I used to watch that all the time, and I think it was my escapism. It was the place, my happy place, where all the stresses, challenges, traumas, and things in life that I'd gone through, I could just switch off from all of that and express all those feelings and emotions that I probably bottled up in many ways, but dance became that outlet. And so that's where it kind of started. And then I was actually at a very good school, but most of my a girls' school that most of my friends went off and they went to university and all this, and I just wanted to dance. And I actually ended up at a place called Laban, which is a contemporary dance college that was based in New Cross. I think it's now in Greenwich. They do have still a campus though in New Cross. And I was there for 4 years. So that's really where it started.
Wow, that's amazing, Sarah, to hear how dance started you, in front of the TV, Top of the Pops, Pans People. I love that. Even Top of the Pops is my generation too, and I used to wait till Friday to listen to it. That's amazing. You actually went to like a school where you learnt dance. Like, what kind of dance? Was it like everything, or was it ballet or contemporary or?
So it was a contemporary dance college, but we would get up at like, well, we would get into the studio at like 8 a.m., ready for ballet. We'd start ballet at 8:30 in the morning. So we'd be there 8 o'clock warming up. And so we had to do ballet every day. We did contemporary dance every day. And then we did various other things such as choreography, costume, dance notation, which is like a musical, it's a bit kind of mathematical with these symbols that kind of represent all of the different movements of different parts of the body. So we did various drama, yeah, and various other things as well. But ballet and contemporary were the two that we had to do every day.
That's fantastic. I love that. It's really great that you got a variety of dances and you get to do that like, every day. Wow. And so was your dream growing up to be like a professional dancer and either on stage or with bands, or was it something completely different?
No, definitely. I just wanted to dance. I just wanted to move. I think I'd grown up with all those musicals, and I thought, that's it. I'm going to be like, doing all these musicals and tap and dance. But I used to love when I watched somebody do much more of an expressive dance. I watched all the dance films that were around at the time. I thought they just kind of would set off, improvise, and not have to be taught anything, that kind of freestyle. And I thought, oh, that would be amazing. And when I first went to Laban and started doing contemporary, this technique called Martha Graham technique, and it's quite intense, very kind of core based, uses the floor a lot of contraction, and it's almost like the contemporary equivalent to ballet, that kind of heavy technique. And I was like, what on earth am I doing? We danced to bongos all the time, some piano, but mostly bongos. But by the end, I just loved it. It was really where I didn't know God then, but it was where he'd placed me.
So, Sarah, that's incredible to hear that you've got to be a dancer, starting very early in your life. I love that. Could you walk us through your first song for Life and Lyrics, why you chose it, and what it means to you?
Yeah, so I was 16 when I started training as a dancer, but uh, further on in my life, I got to actually join a band. There was a bit of stuff that happened in between that, but I ended up with a band called Heartbeat, and we released our first song into the charts, got to number 32 in the UK charts. They were on top of the pops. I'd just joined, so I, as the dancer, wasn't on top of the pops, but we did do a lot of televised performances and those sorts of things. But the song was really crying out about God's heart. And I think it's so relevant today. It may sound a little bit dated in its style, but the lyrics are so relevant to what God is saying now, that he cries tears from heaven.
Thank you so much. What an amazing background that you were on top of the pops, or like you said, you were doing the choreography for them. This is Heartbeat, and this is Tears from Heaven. Stay tuned to Connect Radio. Welcome back to the Sunday afternoon show. Hope you're having a fantastic time listening in to our interview with Sarah Holloway. You've just been listening to Tears from Heaven by Heartbeat, and I'm going to be talking to Sarah all about her amazing life to do with dance and so much more. Well, I love that song, Sarah. Like you said, it is maybe a bit retro, but people like retro memories, so that's always good. Now, I actually wanted to go more into your career after that, because you were saying that you actually were with this band Heartbeat. Like, how did that actually happen? Take us back to the beginning.
Well, it kind of, ties in a lot with when I first became a Christian. And I was training in my last year when I became a Christian, and I had to lay my dance down. I realized that my dance was everything to me. It was just like, if I don't die, that's the end of my life. It really was everything. It'd become my sanctuary, my identity. And so I got before God and I realized that, and I just said, you know what? I have to give this dance to you. That I need to go tell everyone about Jesus. You're the person who's changed my life. I want everybody to know. But, if that means I'm going to be like I don't excuse anyone that's a secretary. I do a lot of admin these days. Boring secretary as I perceived it at that time. But really, I just want to get around the world, and tell everyone. I want to be like, I don't know too much about Mother Teresa, but I knew she was out there telling everyone about Jesus. And I thought, there's just too many people in the world. Like, God, I can't get to everybody. And I happened to go to, it was like, we didn't have many dance classes when I left college, but there were like, mostly in the summer holidays, I'd go to these little aerobic classes. And it was about 3 months before I left college. And I'd kind of laid down my dance, but I still wanted to keep fit. So I went to this kind of old-fashioned keep fit aerobic class, and I was kind of standing there clapping my hands. And suddenly I saw myself on stage. And, God said, the one to many if I put you in front of many, you can communicate my heart more powerfully, but I'm going to give the dance back to you. But this time it's going to be for my glory, not for your benefit. And, I just knew he was going to take that. I didn't know how. I was like living in this obscure little town that nobody knew, nobody saw. I was in a, single parent family. We didn't have the web, so there was no internet to communicate and let people know. But I was just on my face before God and said, right, we'll take it. And within 3 months, I just ended up at this little dance. I think we had a bulletin, and somebody said, oh, look, there's a little dance workshop happening up in London. So I went along. It was a dance company called Springs that are still going. And they saw that I trained and said, right, our A team are going off to Germany, but our B team, we've got two dancers going to Sweden. Would you join them? And I was like, wow, yes, please. So I ended up training with them for 3 months and then going off to Jönköping in Sweden. And usually they would perform to schools and churches and that sort of thing. And I did perform with them for a few years after that, and that's what we mostly did. And this was a particular gig which was celebrating the Kafukafum, which is the YMCA. And in Sweden, it is quite a big deal, or it certainly was back then. And they took us into this massive stadium, this big sports auditorium, and said, right, this is where you'll be performing. It's the biggest stage I'd ever seen. And I didn't know how we were going to fill it, but they said, down here, they're putting all the seats and everything out, will be the King and Queen of Sweden. And they were setting up all the cameras. It's going to be televised live to the nation of Sweden. And that was my debut performance as a Christian. And we were bringing, Christian dances and stories through dance to that audience, because it was, the young man's, both women's and men's Christian association. So they had brought us in, even though they had a lot of other kind of bands and performances that weren't Christian. But they then said, here's a microphone. Can you please introduce the dances, songs, tell people about what you do? So they gave me a microphone, and the two other dancers, I'd been really shy, really introvert, didn't say boo to a goose. But when I got saved, it was like I changed. God gave me a reason and purpose. And so I just preached the gospel. I shared the reason why we did what we did, what it was all about, and was able to share, the good news of Jesus with the whole of the nation of Sweden. In the middle, they all burst out laughing. I'm wondering what's going on. Even the king and queen are there sort of sniggering. I did not know, and maybe I've got to be careful what I say, but my interpreter was a national Swedish compere and renowned throughout Sweden as a devout atheist. And I just got him to translate for me and say, I believe Jesus is Lord.
That's funny. That's why they
And it was
laughed.
only years later, I read my Bible. It said, your gift will make way for itself, and I'll put you before royalty, and I'll put you before kings. And I thought, wow, he did that. And he said, every knee will bow, every tongue will confess. And it just was like God said, look, I've taken you and I'm going to do what I've said. And you just stay in that place before me. And it was a difficult time because I had to keep coming back to that secret place and just being with God, because my prospects didn't look easy. I didn't know how to connect. I didn't know there were any other dancers doing what I wanted to do, which was really reach the broken, the lost. And we were going into schools and churches, but I just felt that I wanted to communicate more of what I'd gone through in my life through dance. I had less of a classical, more of a contemporary dance, and that's what I wanted to bring. And Springs at that time were a little bit more classically ballet trained than contemporary, and did a lot more mime as well. So I went along again to a gig, heartbeat gig, and I heard that they were about to release their song into the charts. Ended up speaking to the guy at the end saying, well, I'm just so excited. God has given me that same heart and vision. He thought I was a lot younger than I was, and he thought I was still at school, but he found out I was trained in dance. He said, we're looking for a dancer. Can you come audition? And the rest is history. I joined the band, moved over to a place called Malmesbury, and we toured and saw amazing, amazing moves of God in that time.
That is incredible. I can't believe that you got to share the gospel and perform before the Swedish Royal Family. That's amazing. And the funny thing, like you said, the irony of the atheist translator sharing that Jesus is Lord. So That's incredible. Wow. And I do know Marjorie, by the way, like small world. I used to grow up in Chippenham and
Oh,
Bath. So
wow.
that's like round the corner. Yeah. Oh, so
Well,
that's
I would go
awesome.
there swimming every week. I would get up very early. I'm not so much of an early person, but I'd go off and have a swim down there in Chippenham.
Oh, wonderful. Little memories there. Wow. So that's amazing. Now, you actually obviously mentioned that when you were doing this, of course, you already had a faith. That's why you were sharing that. Could you take us back to rewind a little bit on how you came to faith? Like, because I think it might have been earlier on in your life. So tell us what happened. And yeah, it'd be great to hear that.
So I grew up with my mum. She's amazing woman of God at this time. But, back then I went through a very young age. We'd moved into a house that had belonged to a medium, and it was full of occult oppression. My mum saw and heard things, so did my sister, so did many other people that visited, which has only come out over recent years. Some of the things that happened that people were too afraid to share, people that even today are not Christians, that they experienced. There was death and there was abuse, there was trauma. And, I, from a young age, had grown up with a lot of fear, a lot of insecurity, a lot of feeling like I didn't fit in because my parents divorced when I was about 5 years old. So I was raised with my mum, who's English. Most people think that I'm adopted because, my dad was Chinese. They forget that we takes two parents. And so I didn't know too much about that side of my heritage and the culture that side, but I carried a lot of that trauma in my, in my mental, emotional, in my identity, feeling like I didn't fit in because I was bullied for how I looked. I was raised in a place called Welling in southeast London and Bexley Heath area, if anyone knows there. And it was headquarters for the National Front. So there was a lot of marches and people going out at that time that caused a lot of fear and intimidation that only compounded how I felt, that there weren't many people that looked like me, and and carrying all the stuff that had gone on as well in my life. So I got to the place of 18, my mum had remarried, and my stepfather was not a pleasant person to be around, and kind of replicated some of the things that we'd walked through as a family, and impacted on my life and my family. So I really reverted into myself. I went to dance, I was at college, I was training. I loved that. I would be like a different person in that space. But I was still, I'd go with my friends that I'd been at school with. We'd go down the pub and they'd all be chatting and laughing. And I'd feel like I was outside of my body. I was just watching what was going on. I felt like I was alienated from the world, like I was in a bubble. I've learned since that that's very similar to how people feel, through loss, bereavement, when somebody dies, particularly if it's like a partner or someone very close. You can feel like you're disconnected from the world. And I was living in that space quite a lot. I was listening to some music that was, I suppose, quite crying out to God. But I didn't really, it was quite depressive. Sort of at 18, I sat in the corner of my room. I remember when just this music playing over and over, and it was the summer holidays. I didn't know what I was doing with my life, and I just thought, I'm never going to live beyond my teen years. This is it. And I was sucking my thumb. I'd gone back, reverted to sucking my thumb and just rocking, and was so withdrawn. I was actually a very shy introvert person, unless I was with my personal group of friends, when obviously I've become more myself. And it was in that time, I think I was crying out to God. I prayed at the age of 10 and I knew God was real, but I always thought he was like this big guy in the stick, with a guy in the sky with a big stick, sort of like, you step out of line, Sarah, and I'm gonna, trip you up, gonna discipline you. And I'd had that harsh discipline as well, so it was like that's how I saw God was. But I thought I didn't want to go to hell. I believed in that, and because I'd experienced spiritual things, I knew the spiritual realm was real, because I'd lived in that and experienced it, though I didn't understand it and couldn't have defined it verbally like I can today. But I suppose I was like crying out to the goodness that was existing. There must be some goodness somewhere, a God that is good rather than this evil. And I think it was probably a year later or something, and I ended up going to this very little Baptist church with just a handful of like 20, 30 people. and realizing that I didn't even go to the service. I went because of some guy, and realizing at the end that teas and coffees, I just burst into tears and cried out to God. And they said, go home, think about it. And I was like, no, if I just felt like if I don't give my life to Jesus today, I'm going to walk out here and get hit by a bus and run over. I just was at that point where I just could not see life beyond that moment. And it was like the next day and that next week, when after I'd prayed and I knew I just surrendered everything because I had nothing to live for, it felt like, even though on the outside it appears I had things to live for. My life looked good on the outside to other people, but inside it didn't. And it was like I'd gone round with my sunglasses on. I often do that with my prescription glasses and I forget to take them off. And then you take them off and you go, oh, wow, it's light. And I suddenly saw the trees, the birds, the squirrels, the sun. And it was like the sky was blue and the clouds and everything was like Technicolor. It was like everything jumped out. It was like God was speaking to me through the wind, through the trees, and saying, look, all of this creation, how could you walk past me every day, the evidence of who I am, and not recognize that this is the world that I created? There is brokenness and there is as you know, evil in it, but I'm here in the midst. And I've always seen you, and I've got purpose for you. And that's when my life completely radically changed.
Wow, Sarah, that is so inspiring, the stages that God put you through. I think also, like you said, growing up in a household that had maybe a new age background, that's amazing that you already knew that there was something not right or something spiritual, because a lot of people wouldn't experience that. It's quite a rare one to have. Wow. And then going from that to knowing your need for God has been amazing. So thank you for sharing that. Wow. Well, to go from your faith testimony back into the creative side of, what you do as a career, could you tell us a little bit more about your love for film? Because I think, you've become a filmmaker.
So yes, I would say people often say, what do you do? And as you know, I've done a lot of things. And, you get to an age, and particularly when I got married, had children, that, traveling and doing dance, just physically wasn't practical. Although I continued to dance, but it was like I love to be able to communicate God's heart. I just wanted people to hear his heart. And I ended up, I think I'd always taken photos. Was looking back, I need to have a good clear out of all my photos, hundreds of photos. I would just take pictures. I think I got given a camera at the age of 10. And I realized what I was doing, a lot of it is nature, pictures of sea and trees and things. But it was like I was seeing God through the lens. I was seeing perspective of things. I'd capture moments through the lens. And I was learning, I suppose, about filmmaking, but didn't realize it. But it was seeing God himself through people, through nature, through story. And I didn't realize then that I love storytelling. I love hearing, how the journey goes, because it takes twists and turns, ups and downs. It isn't a straight line with God. Like the wind, it blows all over the place, and I love that. And so I suppose it was a natural progression. I started, I think my husband had always known. He'd always known that I loved film. I saw film in my mind. I still see certain films that I've never made, and I didn't have the skills those days, didn't even realize that I had some of the skills, but and have been learning along the way. But he had, one of our sons was at a sort of a club, and one of the dads was a filmmaker. He was doing all sorts of TV and stuff, and they ran a course, a little weekend course, Friday to Sunday, Friday night to Sunday morning. That was it. So I did a couple of those weekends, and then the tsunami hit in Sri Lanka, and we'd just happened our one big holiday. We normally just went camping. Our church camp was our holiday with our children every year. And this particular year, we'd, managed to get to this wedding, and we'd gone via Sri Lanka purely because it was cheaper to get to this big wedding. And we'd stayed the night in Sri Lanka, and 3 months later, that was 2004, on the Christmas Eve, the tsunami hit, and it just, wiped out, killed a lot of people. And my children, who were just in sort of infant junior school, one of them wasn't at school at that time, but they were saying, mummy, what about the taxi driver? What about the people at the hotel? And they just were watching the news all the time. And my husband said, go do something, Sarah. Go over there. You've just done a film course. I mean, I'd only done 2 little weekends, but I ended up borrowing a camera from this place, going over there, filming this little, I toured around Sri Lanka, filmed all that was happening, came back, didn't know what to do with it. Some people in my church were starting to film the service. So I said, can you edit it? And they said, no, we can't, but you can use the equipment. And here's a teach yourself DVD.
A
So that's how
DVD.
I
Wow.
learned filmmaking. And so I was doing that for a number of years. I did eventually start doing the camera work for, this company who now a Vivid broadcast company. They've done some very big things. They filmed, I won't name celebrities and people and news and big corporate events. So that's what they went on to do, which I suppose is perhaps slightly different to where my heart and passion is, less about covering events and more about the story, more narrative. And I'd started teaching, fell into teaching. That's a whole nother miracle story. I was not qualified. I was a trained dancer. I didn't stay on and do A levels at 16, but I ended up as a teacher, qualified teacher of media and film, and invited a film producer in or director in to come and talk to my students, and basically ended up working with him. We helped to produce, I was a senior assistant producer on a film called A Dark Reflection. We had lots of airplanes and things in it, and we screened it over at the Marché du Film. It's like the little place in Cannes where you sell your films. So the producer and myself, we went out there, screened it there, and yeah, sold the film there. So that was very exciting. And that is out on Prime. And then he asked me to work on a few other films, but it was when he asked me about a film regarding young suicide and mental health, and I just felt that was really aligned to my heart. Although it wasn't a Christian film, it is very much, I think, God's heart to raise awareness of that. And that's how I got into it. Yes.
Wow, Sarah. Like again, so many things there. Like you actually became a teacher, you did a little filmmaking course, you went over to obviously Asia. That's really inspirational. And I actually wanted to ask you about that because I did some research, of course, before we had our chat, and I can see you've got your own IMDb page, which is a huge thing. And it says that you've won several awards for the documentaries and films that you've made. So could you tell us a bit more about that documentary, Lucy Breaking the Silence?
So yes, as I said, Lucy Breaking the Silence was a feature documentary. So basically that's usually around an hour or more. So a full length film. And it was about this young woman called Lucy who had taken her own life. But so I ended up going and interviewing various people who had lost their loved ones, particularly young people, teenagers and early 20s. Lucy was 22. And so around that sort of age, and I interviewed several of them, and I found something very interesting, that unlike me, who became quite depressive and whatever at that young age, I was very introvert and very kind of reclusive and very depressed, and how you typically think. All of the people that I spoke to who'd taken with the families who their children had taken their lives and their friends all said, like Lucy, they were very outgoing, they were very party people, they were very like center of attention. And I was really surprised because that wasn't my experience from the people I'd worked with. I've worked with the homeless, worked with people through addiction and various other social services and things. And through that time, and because of what we experienced when I was in Heartbeat, but that's another story. I think I'd worked closely with people. I didn't realize how much it doesn't matter what demographic you are, age, gender, ethnicity, whatever challenges, there can be things that are hidden that people don't see, that people are going through. And so I wanted to be able to tell Lucy's story through her own voice and through other people's. I was encouraged, go in, interview them like this, and or tell her like a narrative underneath a voiceover. But I really felt I wanted to tell it through their eyes. And so I gathered a lot of archive footage. Thankfully, the family had quite a lot of archive that she'd made. and friends had done, interviewed her friends as well as the family, and also the impact. I wanted to show those ripples of impact on the wider community. And so, like, even the social services, the police, the emergency services, the first responders, that impacts on their well-being and their mental health to be able to have to deal with that sort of thing. So I wanted to show how one life lost has such huge ramifications for so many people. And that was why that was the story I wanted to tell. And we had the privilege of being able to screen it and talk about it in the House of Commons. One of the people I interviewed, Clark Carlisle, he was actually an under 21 footballer, with the England cap, and played for numerous football, professional football teams. And he's gone through a real challenge of, tried to take his life several times, and suffered quite a few injuries from that as well, and went into all kinds of addiction trying to cope with life. And his perspective is great, so I interviewed him too, and he was able to share his journey and the work that he's now doing to help those that are struggling with those real mental health challenges, and particularly around the area of suicide. And I interviewed some of the charities, like Paul Farmer, who's the CEO of Mind Charity, and Papyrus, which is the leading young youth charity for young people. Yes, suicide in young people. And that was a real honor to be able to speak to so many people and glean that sort of depth of voices. And I think that's why when it was then entered into several film festivals, praise God, it did win a number of, about 9 awards, for, best documentary, or best scientific and educational film, and things like that, which was, yes, a real honor.
That is really inspirational. Again, I can't imagine what that must have been like to actually process that, to storyboard and edit that as well, because it's a lot of heavy things. Like, people say suicide's a taboo subject, but really, like you said, it's people's lives. And I remember being, I think it was at the railway station I was at once, and there was an advert there before I was getting out of the gate, and it basically had a picture of someone smiling, and then it had like suicide awareness and saying, but watch out for people. It's not actually just about being sad, but people can mask on the outside. So, what would you say has been one of the biggest takeaways from making that film? Like, what did you learn?
I think that hearing again and again that it's okay to talk about it, that actually, we think we need to sidestep this if someone's feeling low and depressed. Nobody came to me when I was obviously depressed and low and say, Sarah, how are you doing? We can see you look like you're struggling. We just want to draw alongside you. And, if you want to talk, we don't want to pressure you, but is there anything we can do? And, I had a conversation with someone recently, and I said, look, you don't appear to look like this is where you're at, but I need to just ask that question, because I want to let you know that I'm aware people, and if I don't ask you, you may never feel confident to come to me and say, do you remember you asked me if I was feeling like I wanted to end my life? Well, actually, I'm really struggling right now. It just gives them permission to ask you the question, or to tell you something, or to ask you, to confide in you. And I think I learned that even when I was in Heartbeat, that I used to do a dance about abuse, sexual abuse, and the amount of young people that would come to me and disclose for the first time. They said, I saw myself there. You saw me. And it was like God saw you. But I knew what to say to them, and they could come and speak because they felt safe. And I think if we talk about it, we're saying, it's okay. We're not going to freak out and suddenly ring 999 and sort of, or try and, panic. But actually, we want to be able to listen and see if we can support you or direct you to somebody who can. And sometimes it is just signposting somebody, but saying, I'm here. If you just want to come, have a drink, let's just chill, go for coffee, whatever it might be.
Yeah, like the Samaritans say, it's okay not to be okay. And I think that's really beautiful how you've used the media dance to really minister to people who, be able to speak what they couldn't say. So that's really amazing, and definitely God speaking through you. Well, thank you so much, Sarah, for sharing that part of your story. We'll be back after the break talking more about your career and also more about dance. So stay tuned, guys, to Konnect Radio. Hope you really enjoyed that part of Sarah's story. I know I have. It's really kept me on the edge of my seat, and there's a lot more to come. So stay tuned to the Sunday afternoon show. Well, Sarah, we've come along to the next song on your Life and Lyrics chart, and that is Margaret Becker's All I Ever Wanted. Could you describe why you've chosen that one?
Well, I remember a time, probably if I kind of take you back, I remember laying on my bed and looking up at the ceiling and think, how on earth did I get here? It felt like the bottom had just fallen out of my life. And I think as Christians, we can often think, we hear stories, don't we? We just think everything's really bad. And then you become a Christian, you get saved, and then everything's really good. And you hear the kind of things that, like for I've done publicly, and everybody thinks, oh, that's amazing. Your life must be awesome. But what they don't know, which is why I do behind the scenes, is that quite often life isn't like that behind the scenes. Those moments on stage, on TV, all those things in the limelight are fleeting, they're momentary. If you're on tour, you're traveling a lot out of a suitcase, you may be staying in all kinds of places just for an hour or two on stage. And you might only be on there for minutes, depending on what you're doing. So there's a whole load of life behind that, and most of what I have done is not, it's not for the big bucks. Most of it has been by faith. It's been trusting in God in all the places where, when we were on Top of the Pops and things like that, or on the TV, people thought, oh, you must be, so wealthy, you're this big band. And we were living by faith. We were trusting God for everything. And every week, thinking, how am I going to pay my bills? How am I going to put food on the table? But to outwardly, it looked great, because you have to have maybe something that represents, positively what you're doing. You don't want to turn up in, well, I could say scruffy holy jeans, but that was the trend. But it's like there are things that happen in life, and I got to that point, and things in my circumstances, which isn't just my story. That's why it's difficult to share, because it's not just my story. If it was, I'm very transparent, as you've seen the things that I've shared from stage before. But I suddenly found myself in a situation where circumstances were outside of my control. It was probably outside of many of our control, of our family's control in that moment. And it wasn't just a quick prayer, a few weeks, months, years. It was decades of working through and feeling like Joseph. That's the way I describe it, like the Joseph journey, who suddenly he found himself being sold into slavery, just didn't, almost left for dead by his brothers. And then he found himself in Potiphar's house, and she lied about him. The next thing, he's in prison. And that's how my life has felt in many ways. It's been outwardly great and then inwardly challenging. So one example was when, I was a teacher for 10 years. I stepped out of teaching because God really called me out of that. And I was teaching part-time at the time, at that moment. And then he said, I'm going to shift you out again into space to be my voice. I didn't know what that meant or what it looked like. And the next thing, my husband was having, and I was, oh yeah, that time I was getting these awards for Lucy Breaking the Silence. And at that time, it was like my husband was told, you're going to have emergency open heart surgery. And the percentage of survival or the challenges. And it was a journey, and that's just one thing that I can share. But there was a lot more that was a lot longer, more intensive, that I couldn't share. But suddenly I was like on my own. My husband's in hospital. I didn't know how I was going to provide financially. We didn't have any savings. I needed to be there for him. It wasn't like I could just suddenly go and find a job, and God was telling me not to do that anyway. So, there are things that we find out, circumstances we find ourselves in. I was still going around at that time and promoting the film and letting people know about young suicide, which was all coming out of, my own pocket. So there are things that people don't realize. And I think through it all, and through some of the deeper heartache, that I would say the much rawer challenges I've had to walk through, I found that people didn't understand my journey. People are a lot more, I think, gracious to people who are struggling with different sorts of challenges today. But at that time, I was reaching out and saying, look, I'm in a situation. I don't know what to do. It's extremely painful. I don't know from one day to the other how to put one foot in front of the other, but I know God is in control. I'm in a spiritual battle. Can we please walk this together? And people, I felt very rejected, very alone, because I think nobody understood. A bit like when we'd gone through that house that had been owned by a medium, all the occult stuff. If you tried to tell people then, nobody understood. So you
It's a
felt
bit
very alone,
unique. Yeah.
very alone in it. And I went through a different, very unique journey. I found out that most people had gone through that journey. Things didn't go well. So,
Yeah.
um,
That's
and
that's why you've chosen the song as well, right? Because
so
you
the
can relate
reason
to
I
that.
chose the song is because from when I became saved, I loved listening to Margaret Becker, particularly her album Immigrant's Daughter, and this song, All I Ever Wanted. And it was my prayer that all I ever want is to love you faithfully. And so through this journey, so you wonder why I'm telling you this story, through this journey, I held on to that. This is all I've ever wanted, is to love you faithfully. That's the cry of my heart.
Love it, Sarah. This is Margaret Becker. Sorry, I'm really thinking. It's Margaret Becker, and this is all I ever wanted. Stay tuned to the Sunday afternoon show. Welcome back to our conversation. I'm going to be talking to Sarah now about the creative aspect of her business that she's doing. Fast forward many years. Now, I know, Sarah, that you've done a lot of things. I actually looked at your CV and I was like, wow, we've got so much to talk about. You are a creative coach that trains other creatives. Tell us a bit more about Provision Creatives. Sounds really awesome.
So I think when I stepped out of teaching, I was called back to cover an illness. And through that time, second lockdown hit. So I was there for 6 months and we were doing a lot of that hybrid teaching online as well as in the classroom, sixth form doing A level and BTEC. So it was like, okay, Lord, I know that there are a lot of people out there, particularly creatives. He said, I'm raising a creative army to be my voice. It's not just all my experience. I can go out there. I certainly don't really, well, I have danced, but I don't really dance so much. And again, it's like together we're stronger. And like if you work on a film can take literally, I think we had about 40 plus crew members on our film. So that was on A Dark Reflection. So it takes a lot of people to make something happen. And we can't always be a one band show, one woman, one man show, as I often feel I have been. So I wanted to be able to train up others to be able to pass on, because I will just share three key things. Usually, maybe somebody watching or listening may relate to. There are three things. If you have a creative talent gift and you want to be able to use that in whatever capacity, it may not be on a massive big stage, but it may be doing it in your local community or using it so that other people can really see God's creation or experience some message that he wants to share. But there are often three blockages. One is unfinished business. So if people have got something that, whether it's, something in your family you need to deal with, maybe it's, as I had a client recently, she said, I've just decluttered my home. It was unfinished business. But quite often it's trauma or forgiveness or unforgiveness that we need to deal with, stuff in our lives. And God doesn't want to put us in a place and use our gifts sometimes when we're carrying lots of baggage. He can use us through it. Don't get me wrong. He used me through all sorts of challenges, but he's often wanting to deal with those things. The second thing is be skilled, get trained up. And that's why I also help people, is that if you don't know what you don't know, like I didn't, and I learned on the job doing it, then sometimes you can help other people by letting them know where they can get skilled, where they need to keep focusing in on to get prepared for what it is that God's put in their heart, their spirit. Like speaking on radio, God told me to keep speaking. I never expected to end up as a radio presenter,
Love that.
but he told me to go out and start speaking. So I started sharing with friends or connections or events that I went to. I thought, okay, I've got to practice this talking thing and how to communicate. Then thirdly, we can do all those things. We can be in a perfect space. We can have all the right connections. We can be fully skilled up. But God is the one who's in control of our lives. And that place of surrender, that place of submitting and knowing that there's a timing where we don't want to push doors and end up with an Ishmael, something that is not God's best, but actually waiting for the opportunities that he already has in place. And they may not be what we expect. So when God said, I'm going to use your voice, radio was the last thing from my mind, But when I was invited by Gareth to consider doing a show, I just knew it was God because it was so aligned to what he'd already said.
That's
Release your
wonderful.
voice.
And Sarah,
So
can I ask
the
about
coach,
that? So sorry,
yeah,
sorry
oh,
to
sorry.
interrupt you there. Sorry, Sarah, would you find out about the radio show from Gareth? Did he just approach you, or were you at the same event? How did it happen?
I can't remember. I don't know. We got on a call somehow. I think I'd seen Konnect Radio at something. And I thought Gareth had contacted me to say, can I interview you like this? And after a short conversation, he said, would you do a little pilot show? which,
Wow,
which took me aback. But there we go. And the rest is history.
that's
But with
amazing.
regards to the coaching, so there's two kind of people that you know, I make myself available for, and I've scaled a lot back because I do a lot of things, and so I've got less time capacity. So when I do have clients, I want to really be able to give them, that time and quality. So I have times where I just have paused that as well, but I usually work one to one. I've had groups in the past, but I generally work one to one. And so I've had filmmakers, I've had artists, even somebody that's now a radio presenter on one of the other well-known stations, but I won't
No
go there.
way.
But who at the time they had their gifts, a filmmaker who's now just released his second film, and he'd done his first and then was coming through all different challenges and overwhelm and confusion, not knowing what to do next. And so it's really exciting when I see God opening up those opportunities for previous clients. But so it's creatives who really have a heart to surrender their gifts for God and maybe don't know what to do next. And also people that perhaps may not necessarily be those creatives, but they have a heart for God and they want to see a difference. They want to see change. They want to know that their life counts for something. Maybe they've even, run their own business or just been working all their life and they feel like, what difference have I really made? And they feel like God is on the move. They can sense that and they want to be part of it. Well, if they want to be a legacy leaver, then I will work with them to bring some kind of project, something that's dear to their heart, and to make it happen.
That's incredible, Sarah. And it's amazing to use your experience from all those things, that's dance and teaching and music and things, to re-equip the next generation. I love it. Now, you're also an author. So, what inspired you to write your latest book, Discern the Time? And what do you hope readers will take away from your writing in general?
So yeah, that's an interesting one because I've written a few books that I've never published, or they're half, just pulling all of that stuff that's inside you down. But God stopped me probably about 10 years or just over ago and said, what you saw in Heartbeat. So we were a band, we toured, and we would bring the gospel through our music, but we would reach a generation that was struggling with all kinds of challenges, the young people of the day. And they are very typical of the challenges that young people, go through today. Although we would get all age groups coming, it was particularly that sort of teens and 20s. And we were able to speak to them. We were able to communicate with their language. But what we saw wasn't just the fact that we did all these amazing big platforms and having thousands of people come and, hear our music and sort of this big following, but it was the fact that we had just hundreds. It would be hundreds at a time. Sometimes we'd be in an auditorium and something like 200 people would just come to the front in tears. And it
Wow.
wasn't always like a nice little queue. I'm going up to give my life to Jesus and everything's going to be okay. But they would come. We experienced, even whole churches coming and repenting verbally, aloud, wailing in tears. We saw prophecies, miracles, healings. Young people, one year everyone threw away their glasses and I was like, I wear glasses and I didn't, and it was like, but all these young people were like, I can now see, and they were reading out what they could see at the back. And it was just like seeing those things. um a woman get out of a wheelchair, run around a building, nobody praying for her. When you've experienced those things, we knew that God was on the move, and that wasn't just in heartbeat times, in our things, but during those meetings we did experience those people healed of skin disease akin to leprosy. It was just awesome. And I think seeing those transformations in people's lives, seeing real repentance, this was like, I want you, Jesus, more than anything. I don't want to just go, oh, well, I'm going to try Christianity and see if that works. No, they were like hungry, they were desperate, and God moved.
That's
God would just meet
incredible.
them. And when you've seen that, something changes in you. You can't be the same again, which is why when I went through my real darkest times, that carried me through. I had to keep going back to the word, the Bible. I had to keep going back to remind myself of God's voice for me, even when it felt like I couldn't hear him. And God kind of took hold of me at that time. I was teaching media and film at the time and part-time teacher. And he said, Sarah, I need you to step out. I need you to sort of, he said, what you saw back then was just a glimpse, a tiny glimpse of what I'm about to do. And what I'm going to do, no man can get the glory for. No person can say it's because we did this or we whatever. He said, but I need my people to get ready, to prepare and be positioned. It's a heart position, it's a mental position, as well as a physical, practical positioning. And he said, my people aren't ready. They are not ready. And he showed me various, excuse me, various things. I wrote them all down. He said, put it in a book. And I literally had just gone, I went off, I stopped my coaching at that time. I was teaching a couple of groups with creatives, and we were having a great time. I was really seeing God move and people's lives were being changed. But God, I just had to withdraw. I had to lay it down. I was like, well, how am I going to live? How am I going to pay my bill? He said, just trust me. And I went over to a friend who was in Jersey and just walked around her island for 4 days, came back and just put all this down on paper. And within 3 months, just had this book. It's called Discern the Time. You can go check it out. It's
Love
available
it.
online and at libraries. If you're in the UK, you can get it free from the library,
Nice. That's really
called
cool in the
Written,
libraries.
or
Oh,
Amazon. But yes, but it's really a call. It's full of short stories. It's full of some of the words, or a lot of the words that God gave me, and bringing it all together so that it's practical. Sometimes I used to read the Bible and think, that's great, love one another. How do you love when the person that you love is not treating you in a way that demonstrates what you believe love is? How do you actually do that? What does that mean when your brother, your sister in Christ is rejecting you and you're supposed to love them? How do you do that if they don't want to listen? What does that look like? So it's really taking the putting it into a more grounded, more practical, but giving those short stories that is challenging perhaps to consider what it means and the time that we're living in, and realizing that time's short and we can't just play about. I saw a picture of where everyone was just sitting on the seashore twiddling their thumbs, apart from the few that were getting ready, and it was like we were at the Red Sea, where Moses went through and the sea stopped them, and the Israelites would be the Egyptian army were behind them, coming, chasing them, trying to take them over. The darkness was increasing, but they couldn't push through in their own natural self. But those who were hearing the sound, who were sensing it's time to get ready, were tying up their sandals, putting their jackets on, putting their rucksacks on, filling up their water flasks, ready to go. And when the waves parted, they went. And other people started to get ready because they could see what people were doing. But some were going, it's all right, I know the way, and trying to go a different way. Others were going, no, let's go back. It was much easier. Some were just sitting, enjoying the sun, and being blasé about it. But I could see as those that were ready and those that were getting ready, they went like an army, not as like an arrowhead, but together, linked. Like I talk about the Roman, the testudos, where they went like a shield together. But they just moved out and all these rows were moving, but then suddenly the waters closed. And there were those that were just flippant or trying to do it in their own strength, that didn't really hear, that got left behind. And God said, don't let anyone get left behind. Raise
wow.
the warning.
And that's what you feel that book is kind of helping people is to really value their time and to use their
Yeah.
gifts, for this time that we're in.
Discern the time. Can you hear the call to be positioned for purpose?
Fantastic. Wow. I
Hence,
want to read it
hence,
right
hence
now. I'm
the
so
picture.
inspired. I'm like, oh, like that's incredible. Now I want to go into your third choice for life and lyrics, and it's Sean Rodriguez, and it says it is finished. Tell us more about the song.
So I think that is the fact that I wanted something that obviously is a little bit more current, because I've had some music. When you tell your story, you have to go back over years. and to be able to, connect those moments of music to those moments in history. But I think we are at a time now where God is saying, Jesus did it on the cross. It's finished. Everything that we're living in, everything that we're in, we don't need to be scared. We don't need to be afraid. We need to be confident because it is finished. We're hearing some horrific things in the news, and there's a lot of intimidation towards Christians and standing up for your faith, and people display it in different ways. I don't always agree with how everyone expresses their faith, but we're called to live in unity. We're called to be part of a body. We're all different parts, whether you're a nostril or a toenail, or a lung, not just the mouths and the eyes and the obvious, the hands and the feet that are obvious, but all those hidden parts that are so relevant. An eyebrow is so relevant, but we think it's only the eye. But if you don't have eyebrows, you recognize why we have eyebrows.
Yeah,
Please don't
definitely.
take them off. And there is the purpose, and it needs to function and work together. And that's what God is calling the body to work together, not in isolation. It looks different. Some parts of the body feel like more isolated, but we're still joined together. And it's knowing that the time is close. Whether I'm alive or not to see Jesus return, I don't know, but I do know it's imminent. And I also know that no matter what anyone is going through, when I've gone through my darkest times, over a long period, extensive period of time, that my hope was in the fact that it's already written, it's already finished. Jesus did it on the cross once. From the beginning of time to the end of time, it all culminated at that cross where he said, my blood is enough. I have conquered sin. I've conquered death. I've conquered hell. It is finished.
Wow, so powerful again, Sarah. Thank you for introducing the song. This is Sean Rodriguez, and this it is finished. Stay tuned to Life in Lyrics. Welcome back, guys, to the last part of our interview. I'm talking to the lovely Sarah Holloway for her Tuesday show, which you definitely need to tune in on behind the scenes. And I'm going to be wrapping up her story today. So, Sarah, I know that when I look online for all the things you're involved with, which is, writing and coaching and all these incredible things, you also have the word prophetic that comes up quite a lot on your website. So could you tell us a bit more about, what does it mean to be prophetic or even what prophecy is? I mean, we've got different listeners, as you know, from different parts of the world. So I'd love to, hear more about what that means.
I suppose I never put that label on myself. I have used it in some things now, because I recognize that God can use me in that way. But it's not a label. I hear some people say, I'm a prophet and all those things. That's not a label I kind of jumped into. It was really when I was a new Christian. And I remember reading, I think it's in Romans, and it says Romans 12, is it? And it says, there are those that have all these different gifts. It talks about the prophetic and leading and teaching. And the other one is encouraging. And I thought, well, I may not be able to get into all those ones, but I'll be an encourager. I can do that. I'm going to just encourage everyone. So I literally went out, and when I met people, and I didn't want to be flattering because there's a fake flattery, but I wanted to find a place to be able to encourage. And I'm not saying that I'm the best encourager, but I stepped out in that and sought to become as good as I could at encouraging people, at recognizing and seeing things that maybe others didn't see. And sometimes I'm guilty of that, getting so busy in our lives. And there's a lot of stuff going on that people don't realize. Like I said, when you're going through challenges as well as the natural life stuff, you don't always have the capacity, but I seek to, where I can, to want to encourage people, because everybody needs lifting up. Everybody needs that bit of an encouragement and saying, well done. I mean, Lucy, you're doing an amazing job sharing all these stories. I listened to some of them and I was really engaged. And finding out the journey of different people's lives, and you go like you've got that map of the world. You're not just looking for people in the UK, you're going across borders, and you're bringing those cultural stories as well. And I think it is so important that we understand the person behind what people see or hear. And so I think for me, prophecy came out of the fact that I was seeking to hear God's heart for people. I was seeking to hear, what do you want to encourage that person with?
Thank you so much, Sarah, for, listening into my show. I appreciate you're a very busy lady, so thank you for listening to the stories. I'm always amazed by what God's doing in Italy and America and all these different parts in the world. So thank you so much for listening in. Now, I think that's really great to hear that you have that prophetic gift of, it can actually be speaking God's words of encouragement to people, and it looks different for everyone. Like you were saying, you felt like God spoke to you through some pictures or some words or dreams, and that really can help you and encourage other people in their walk. Now, could I actually ask also about that, if it's okay to ask, only share what you think is okay, is what has prophecy played in your life? So is there a particular story where you've had a dream or something that came true or something that was really significant in that gifting?
I think I'm quite a visual person. So I would often see things, and it was only over the many years that I started to realize I'm seeing things. And so when I pray, you can't just switch it on. You don't know if God's going to show you. There's times when it feels like God's silent, because some people go, oh, yeah, give me a word. And it doesn't work like that. However, God, when you're in that space, God can just flow. And sometimes you don't even realize what you're saying. But I would often, when I would, just see, not always, I was going to say when I pray and close my eyes. No, I can just during the day, sometimes I can be about, washing up, clean, doing some housework, whatever. And you start to see things. And I would see things. So I remember one thing I write about in my book is I opened the curtains and I could just see like this um, glint in the sky. It appeared quite dark, but it was almost like a glint. And suddenly in my mind's eye, it was like I knew it was an angel, but it was a warrior angel. It was like an army. And as it appeared, it's like I could see as it lit up. It was like there were all this whole army of angels in this armor, and it was bright and it was shining and it was so radiant. And I was thinking, well, go, because there's this darkness. And they didn't. They were waiting for the order. They were waiting for the commander to say, okay, go. And I could also hear this squealing. It was like a pig that was about to be slaughtered or captured. It was awful, but it was like I just felt in my mind's eye, that God was saying, that's the voice of the enemy. He's afraid. He can see what you can see, and he knows that his days are numbered, and so he's going to go round trying to kill as many people as he can. He knows his days. And I think I'd watched a film about, I think it was the Second World War, might have been the first, I can't remember. So anyway, I think it was the Second World War in the concentration camp, and they knew the people in the camp, the guards knew that the enemy, or their enemy, the English or whatever, the British had invaded the country, that they were on their doorstep and we were about to win the war. But they still started intimidating and tried to kill as many people in the concentration camp as they could, even though they knew they'd lost the war. Because until those people invaded and came in and took over the camp, they were wanting to take with them as many people as they could. And that's what I felt the enemy was seeking to do in life. And so I've often seen things like that. However, over the years, some of them were smaller, little things, some of them are bigger, more what you might call prophetic. But I've seen things happen over many decades. I've been around a while. And seeing that actually some of them, or quite a few of them, have come true. I've given them to friends and people, and one was quite specific when a friend of mine, he writes about it in his book, where he lost his wife to dementia, and I gave him a very specific, it was like a story, and everything in that story happened exactly as it was written. So I think I've learnt over the years that God does seem to use me with that kind of prophetic awareness. And I think for other people, sometimes it looks different. Sometimes it's just a sense. You just sense something or you just see something, and it's just testing it and seeing, well, if that happens, if it comes true, or you're seeing other voices saying the same thing, you kind of think, oh, yeah, God is speaking to me. And that's how you test it. It's not just accepting everything at face value, because a lot of people will come with false prophecy. And I think we need to be wary. But the more we know the word of God, the more we know the Bible, then we know that is our plumb line to test
Absolutely.
everything by.
What an encouraging story. Very powerful, that image of angels as well and warring angels. I think the World War analogy is so spot on as well. It's like you can be intimidated by the enemy, but actually you are on the winning side, you're on the victory. So keep encouraging people for God. Well, it's been great chatting to you, Sarah. I'd love to finish this interview with, firstly, could you tell us why people should listen in to your show on Tuesday? There's so many reasons. And then lastly, could you introduce our last song, with Fame by Irene Cara?
Well, where should people listen? Well, my show does change week to week. Sometimes it can get a little bit intense and we go very faith. Sometimes it can be much more kind of light-hearted. The other week, yes, I lost the plot. I burst into a fit of giggles. I was talking about healing, but I ended up talking about the postal service and
Oh,
babies being posted in the mail, which I didn't know about. And when I
okay.
looked it up, it just, yeah. And then I found out two suffragettes had posted themselves in the mail to 10 Downing Street to talk to the Prime Minister, but yeah, he returned to sender. And I lost it. I couldn't record my show. I just kept laughing. So, you know, we just don't know where the show may go, but it's usually full of faith. It usually has Christian artists that sort of drop in amongst all the other music to really help build a bit of a story. And it's a whole mix, really, just taking you behind the scenes and some of the challenges that we face in life. So yeah, why not tune in, get some of the latest music and hear some stories, and who knows what I will say. Depends how much time I have to prepare. I normally prepare on these days, but today's really busy.
You're very
So
organized, so I appreciate your
well, I don't
time.
know if it's going to be flung together. Sometimes it is a bit flung together. Secrets out.
Behind the scenes of your behind the scenes. And then could you introduce the last fun song, Fame? Why is this important to you?
I think it's where it all began. It was the fact that I started off as a dancer, wanting to perform and reach that place of fame. And very quickly, I realized that fame is just so man-made. And but in the music, the song changed its meaning because it says, I want to fly high, remember my name. And it was like, actually, it's Jesus. It's almost like I feel like God is saying, remember my name, that we can fly high with him, but it's his name that we need to remember. So it really grounds me and reminds me of the journey I've come from and where I am today and whose name I want to make famous. That I've said no to covering and interviewing some people because I do a lot of interviews, and they were people like, in my natural, I'm going, oh yeah, but these are really big and these are going to, like, and God said, no, you're not here to make your name famous. You're here to make my name famous. And sometimes it's finding my last little scripture, 1 Corinthians 1, 24 to 29. God takes the foolish things of this world, those who are seen as nothing, those who just don't even feel recognized, that the world dismiss, to shame the wise, the foolish. And so that's why this song reminds me there is only one name that we're here on this earth to proclaim and make his name famous.
Thank you, Sarah Holloway. It's been such a privilege to get to know you more on this interview. I hope you've had a great time, and thank you so much.
And I should have said, and kick off your shoes and have a dance.
Awesome. Yeah, have a dance like Sarah does for her show. Thank you so much, Sarah. Have a wonderful day, and I can't wait to hear your show again next week.
Thank you so much, Lucy. It's been a pleasure.